The Bitcoin price is being actively suppressed and even destroyed. Now Anthony Scaramucci is talking about that. We're much deeper than we really should be. But he also says that here in the Middle East, nations are secretly building sovereign wealth funds or state funds with Bitcoin. At the same time, a Bitcoiner is now officially the Director of National Intelligence. Tulsi Gabbard herself owns Bitcoin and advocates for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And now we have the next big position in the US being filled by a Bitcoiner. Also, it's now being publicly announced that Elon Musk will not sell his Bitcoin at Tesla. But we also have massive pushbacks because the Polish central bank is strongly against Bitcoin. And we need to take a close look at what's going on here, because we see the next European central bank. They absolutely have no interest in Bitcoin. And the Polish central bank fits into a category of a whole lot of central banks that just aren't interested in freedom, that don't want any part of it. On prosperity, but who would rather remain poor and who would rather rely on surveillance. First, though, we need to take a look at a very, very important position, and that's Tulsi Gabbard. It says here that the Senate has voted to end negotiations, thereby accepting the confirmation vote for Tulsi Gabbard. Because of this vote, she is 100% confirmed. We're about to have our new Director of National Intelligence any moment now. And it's crazy that we now have Bitcoin in so many relevant positions here. Whether it's something related to intelligence with JFK, or if it's about the Treasury Secretary, the SEC, of course, also the President. That means a whole lot of relevant positions here in America are now filled by Bitcoiners. We're also looking at Tulsi Gabbard's portfolio here. She has $50,000 in Bitcoin. I mean, it's not a lot, but it's still the biggest crypto position she has. She also has a few shitcoins and stuff, but those are all smaller allocations. Tesla has an even higher position than Bitcoin. We'll come to that later. But what's even more important here is that Tulsi Gabbard is advocating for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. She is saying here that it is valuable for the USA to have its own strategic Bitcoin reserve. We have more and more political support, not only for Bitcoin, but also for the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Of course, they can't decide here, or something like that a strategic Bitcoin reserve will be created, but it is still very, very relevant simply for the general sentiment that there is more pro-Bitcoin approval in the USA, and that definitely increases the likelihood, even if it doesn't have a direct impact on a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but it still raises the pressure to implement a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Every politician, every big name, even every little person, whoever opens up to Bitcoin and advocates for a strategic Bitcoin reserve is increasing the pressure to implement a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And we just talked about Tesla. We see here that Elon Musk still hasn't sold his Bitcoin at Tesla. At first, it was even said that, hey, Tesla bought more Bitcoin. So that means Tesla somehow bought a few new Bitcoins, but that was clearly a false report. Because all that's happening here in the end is that now, so to speak, they say. I mean, the files have come to light showing how much Bitcoin Tesla currently owns. And then it was just seen that the value was higher than the last time the files came to light. But they made a mistake here. So a lot of people thought they had more Bitcoin. But the only thing that's happening here is the dollar amount has obviously gone up because Bitcoin now has a higher value. And then a lot of people read into it thinking, yeah, they have more Bitcoin now. But that's definitely not true. So you really have to be careful here. But it is still a very, very good sign. They now have $1 billion in Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin holdings are getting higher and higher. This is, of course, a very, very good argument for possibly adding more. And it's also a good sign that Elon Musk isn't selling. So basically, HODL. Bitcoin to the moon, let's fucking go. But what I found to be a really, really interesting statement here is, and that's a statement from Anthony Scaramucci, who is also very, very involved in politics in the U.S. and has a direct line about Donald Trump. He also shares insights about the Trump family and stuff like that. Anthony Scaramucci also thinks it is very, very good that the strategic Bitcoin reserve is not coming yet. He is of the opinion that the fact that there is still some time will enable the majorities to be worked out even better. That means there's still a stronger consensus here. By the way, go ahead and drop a like for Gilberto, the janitor in the background. Definitely bullish. Proof of work. For sure, he believes that a slow, strategic Bitcoin reserve over half a year, which is still being evaluated, is much better because there will be even more support in 6 months. And then you might be able to formulate the laws even more strongly, like now, where there would ultimately be a lot of disputes and a lot of back and forth, and there isn't such a strong consensus yet. But he's talking now about something that's very, very relevant, because a lot of people are asking, okay, why is the Bitcoin price so low? Why aren't we already much higher? Anthony Scaramucci makes a really strong point here. He says the Bitcoin price should actually be much higher, but we're still at a lower point. He then also gives the reasoning for that, and he also says the Bitcoin price is being damaged here, meaning being destroyed, being attacked, being oppressed. But check it out, we'll evaluate the whole thing together because the statement is really highly relevant.
Well, listen, Andrew, I began my Bitcoin journey about 5 years ago, and I've been tarred and feathered and praised as it goes up and down, and you oscillate between genius and dummy. But I think that Bitcoin now is representing where prices should have been in 2022. And And said differently, if you look at the November Bitcoin futures approval, just studying administrative law, the spot ETF should have been approved sometime in the first quarter of 2022. So all of that delay caused a lot of that price damage. And so I see it here as the community seeing itself getting propitious, decent, middle-of-the-road regulation. And if you look at the people that the Trump administration has put into those positions, I think you end up getting that. And so 97,000, 98,000 is sort of where I thought we would be 3 years ago. So the real question is, will the institutions enter the game? And I think you see some of the endowments starting to do that. We know some of the sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East are quietly doing that. And so I think it's going to be a very good year for Bitcoin.
So he says here very clearly that the current Bitcoin price is around 100,000 US dollars. That is the Bitcoin price that we should have had 3 years ago. So he explains that too. Well, first of all, he goes on to say that Bitcoin is always a roller coaster ride in the end. Sometimes you are the genius when you see a Bitcoin go up, then you are the fool again. When Bitcoin corrects by 20-30%, but he also makes it clear that the spot ETFs, the Bitcoin spot ETFs, should have been approved relatively quickly after the futures ETFs. That would have been in the first quarter of 2022. And then, of course, we would have the huge Bitcoin rally that we only saw in 2024 thanks to the Bitcoin ETFs, which we might have seen much earlier. Maybe the bear market wouldn't have been so harsh either. So that's a really bold statement he's making here. And he makes a good point here because he says that now the regulation is much, much better, just like with Tulsi Gabbard. In a lot of major positions in the US, we now have Bitcoin supporters, and especially the Treasury Department. The SEC is filled with Bitcoin enthusiasts. And accordingly, it also implies that Gary Gensler and the whole SEC held back the Bitcoin price back then because they were also holding back the regulation. That means they were clearly involved here because they consciously not only poorly regulated Bitcoin, not only poorly regulated, but in some cases even fought against it, with Operation Jogpoint 2.0, where a lot of debanking took place. Anyone who had anything to do with Bitcoin or crypto got sanctioned here. Their fiat accounts were closed. There were some really intense incidents. And so he concludes here, hey folks, we should be much, much higher up. But on the flip side, you can also look at it positively. If we were already much higher up, it would be a lot harder for you to buy Bitcoin here. So here's another call. If you want to buy Bitcoin, I'll drop a link below. 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin with the code. That's an absolute recommendation from me. And this is how you can take advantage of the low Bitcoin prices right now. And the same thing that Anthony Scaramucci says could also be applied to a strategic Bitcoin reserve. For example, you could say, okay, if the strategic Bitcoin reserve doesn't come now, then you could do an interview for 3 years and say, yes, the Bitcoin price is basically suppressed because if the strategic Bitcoin reserve had come 2 years earlier, then the Bitcoin price would be 200,000, 300,000 euros higher or something like that, or dollars. I mean, on one hand, I find the argument pretty interesting, but on the other hand, it's just how it is. It's also one of those coulda, woulda, shoulda situations. It just happened the way it has now happened. You just have to accept it as it is, and you can only take the positive from it. Namely, that it will now be even cheaper, for longer. And you can take that as a very, very positive thing and then profit from it, instead of just picking them up here. What was also a very exciting statement here was that it will be a very good year for Bitcoin. And that in the Middle East, countries are already secretly filling their pockets. So whether it's Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, or whatever, there are various rumors. He definitely says that they are already filling their bags here. But the ones really whining here are the Polish Central Bank, it said here. The president of the Polish Central Bank, Adam Klapinski, rules out holding Bitcoin reserves under any circumstances. He says something about Bitcoin that there's a lot to say about it. You can buy a lot and win a lot, but you can also lose a lot. However, we prefer something safe. So, the central bank in Poland is not interested in Bitcoin. She says here Bitcoin is not safe. And then you have to ask the counter question, folks, how safe is the dollar? How safe is the Polish currency? I don't even know, is it zloty, or I don't even know what the Polish currency is called, but I think it's zloty or something like that. I mean, it's just a really, really bad starting point when you're dealing with constantly inflating money, and says Bitcoin is not safe. I mean, you can definitely say that if you're speaking from a Bitcoin position and says the euro or the zloty or the dollar or whatever, I am not safe. In the end, that is a fitting argument because you just have the facts on your side here. But the central bank doesn't have the facts on their side. Because if we look at the facts, Bitcoin has, first of all, a better performance than all the fiat currencies worldwide. Secondly, it has a higher security, meaning it has greater censorship resistance. You can't just expropriate it or something like that. It also has a higher uptime when we look at it. Even the central banking systems go down from time to time. Then there are some downtimes and you can't access your money. Banks have somehow closed or something like that. So You can definitely say based on facts that this statement here is not true. The head of the Polish central bank says, but in the end, it just shows that the elite is shaking in their boots. They obviously don't want Bitcoin, I get it, because that might mess up your own business model a bit, right? Or it makes you question it. It wouldn't necessarily ruin it. You can also use it to your advantage, like in the US, maybe with a strategic Bitcoin reserve or something. But apparently, they don't get it, and so they have to stay poor here. So there are two options: adopt or have fun staying poor. And the Central Bank of Poland is also making a decision here. Staying poor, so they don't want adoption, but instead, they choose to just keep their Ponzi scheme going here. See you later. Peace out.